Bon tarde. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here and to see many friends and to connect in person again with our partners. Just some brief thanks first to my co-executive secretary, the Deputy Secretary General of the ITU, Tomas Lamanauskas, with whom I have partnered a lot on these initiatives. The rest of the ITU team, obviously led by Doreen Bogdan-Martin, our co-chairs for the advisory body, Professor Sandra Massimiano and Minister Tajani, and thanks to the team at Anacom for putting on a great event here in this lovely city. Professor Massimiano set me up nicely with her comments about the importance of expertise and data. And what I'm going to do now is share a little bit of information so that everyone might have sort of some baseline background on the nature and extent of cables, operational issues and risks, and some of the challenges facing the industry that are being addressed through the work of the advisory body, and which we're going to discuss in more detail in the panels starting later this afternoon and into tomorrow, and also some related issues with investment in the breakfast tomorrow. And so just briefly, here you have a couple of maps showing the extent of cables in a couple of regions. There has been a ferocious amount of new construction of cables driven by a plethora of things that are available in real time on our phones that are stored in data centers that are relying on artificial intelligence. As the ITU Secretary General had mentioned, the scale of the activity is enormous these days. And that is driving significant cable construction. The 600 number was a lot lower even when we were in Abuja a year ago. And so we are seeing new cables in a lot of parts of the world that haven't had cables before, and even remote places seeing a second cable. But there are still unconnected parts of the world, and those whose connectivity is not resilient and is fragile. So when we talk about the risks to cables, globally each year about 70% of cable damage is due to fishing or vessel anchors. But there are a lot of other activities in the oceans and on shore that can damage cables. And there are also actors who engage in intentional activities with equipment theft and intentional infrastructure damage, cyber attacks on the communications stream. But it's important, even with headlines right now about suspected cases of intentional damage, to remember that so much of what is going on is more of an accidental nature, and that we can't neglect resources to address those risks as well, particularly as countries become more interested in seabed mining, either in their areas of jurisdiction or on the seabed of the high seas, with different kinds of energy resource development, whether it's hydrocarbons or renewables and the like. And then the natural environment is changing with climate change and more unpredictable weather, all of which can have big impacts on cables. And so with the ICPC, we worry a lot about all of that, in part because cables are really tiny and fragile. So this is a 17 millimeter deep ocean fiber optic cable. This is it. This isn't bundled together with 100 of these to create a cable. This is the cable. The communication stream is carried over these glass fibers. The rest of it is for conducting power, for amplifiers, and for protection. In coastal areas, these might be armored with steel wire rod to make a greater circumference, and they might be buried if seafloor conditions permit. And so when we're talking about these risks, it doesn't take much from these activities to damage a cable like this. And that's why cable protection and resilience. In the event that one segment can't be protected, having alternative paths and infrastructure is really critical. So the ICPC has the world's leading data sets about submarine cable damage, and goes to great lengths to collect this in a way that complies with competition laws, because this information comes from competitors, but also to analyze it and publicize it. And so this provides, and the term fault is used in the industry for an event that will eventually require a repair. It isn't necessarily a complete breaking of the cable or severing of it. But that is the industry term. It's possible in some cases, if a cable is penetrated by seawater, it creates an electrical fault, but the cable may still operate for some time. It still needs to be repaired. And so here we have information both about causes where known or suspected, and also about particular fault types. The ICPC gathers a lot of this information from different maintenance zones around the world. There are a couple different flavors of zones where cable owners band together to contract with ship owners to provide maintenance in a particular zone, with a ship kept in a port in that area, or vessel operators themselves that offer what's referred to as private maintenance, where they have their own maintenance product and go out and shop that to customers. In 2024, there were 204 repairs globally conducted in 136 jurisdictions. 52% of those actually affected the service provided by the cable. The longest repair delay in those cases was 947 days. So when we talk about delays and the loss of connectivity, that is really massive. But as our chairman, Dean Vaverka, noted in his video at the beginning, the incidence of faults has not kept pace with the massive new deployments of cables. And so per route kilometer, we are seeing the fault rate actually drop. So in terms of ocean areas, the busiest areas are closer to shore. So the blue in this pie graph represents the territorial sea that extends 12 nautical miles seaward. The exclusive economic zone, these are zones established under the Law of the Sea Convention and customary international law. The EEZ is out to 200 nautical miles, and then beyond that is the high seas, which is really the deep ocean. That's not where we're seeing most of the damage. It's where the other human activity and the impact of weather and climate change and the like is occurring in shallower water. And here we have a global distribution of the repair frequency. It's a little hard to read what some of the colorings represent. But in the busiest ocean areas, we have the greatest number of repairs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is always a big delay with the repair as well, which I'll talk about at the end. So this is really the mission of the ICPC, is to address cable protection and resilience. I'm not going to go through all of this detail because I think Dean covered some of this in his video message at the beginning. But we are an NGO, although we have government observers, and our mission is really to help identify and mitigate the risks of damage and promote protection and resilience. And that includes legal and scientific components. I'm the legal advisor. We have a marine science advisor. We participated in the negotiations over the BB&J agreement, which just entered into force last month, which will address all kinds of activities on the high seas and the seabed of the high seas. And so we're very active also with the International Seabed Authority in addressing coordination with deep seabed mining. So we have a lot going on. We have partnerships with other UN agencies, but much of our focus recently has been on the advisory body with the ITU. So what do we need for cable protection and resilience? I think that Professor Massimiano really highlighted, if you had to identify one thing, regulatory certainty is really critical. but also, as both Professor Massimiano and Minister Tajani mentioned, cooperation. And that's cooperation within governments. That is cooperation between governments who are neighbors or in region, and that's cooperation between governments and industry. I think there is greater awareness of the importance of cables. There's still not great awareness of the technical characteristics. People don't really, in many cases, realize how tiny they are. There's a lot of cooperation in the industry, even among competitors, to ensure that resources are used to build and repair cables. And there needs to be a better understanding of the sources of threats and risks, which I summarized on my last slide. In the crowded oceans, there's a need to engage a lot with other industries. The ICPC is not the only industry body like this. The ICPC is the global one. We have regional cable protection committees in many parts of the world that focus on a lot of regional issues to try to address these in a more granular fashion. And a lot of it is engagement with other marine industries. And then much of my job is also promoting, as part of that regulatory certainty, the rule of law for the oceans. Just briefly, the industry does a lot itself to try to design protection and ensure protection post-installation, but it needs governments to work with industry on the things that industry can't address alone. And so, in terms of the pre-installation design protection activities, there's a desire first to find the shortest route, but then to adjust it to ensure that it is not exposed to unacceptable risks. There's also, within the last 15 years or so, a much greater focus on geographic diversity. And so that the maps that I showed you at the beginning, there's still a lot of clustering on cables on particular routes. But we're seeing innovations with a lot of new routes that have never seen cables before, particularly in the southern hemisphere. And that will help to build resilience as well. But there's a lot of study, in addition to seafloor survey activities, to try to identify an appropriate route. And then there's a whole laundry list of activities that cable operators use to address protection post-installation. A lot of these are addressed in ICPC recommendations, which are documents facing toward the industry itself about what is recommended to ensure cable protection. And this ranges from placing cables on nautical charts, engaging with other ocean industries, trying to maintain spatial separation where possible as a method of protection, and many others. I'm not going to go through the whole list in the interest of time. So we had summarized some of our thinking about best practices, sort of our wish list, what we would like to see from governments, things that we as an industry can't do on our own, that would complement those pre-installation and post-installation protection activities. And we summarize them in a 12-page document called the Best Practices, which we continue to update, and we've translated into some languages other than English. But it establishes some baseline general principles for promoting cable protection, including really a comprehensive approach to risk, whether it's accidental or intentional, and addresses other principles. Again, you can find the best practices on our website, and we're always happy to engage about these. In addition to the general principles, there are a lot of very specific best practices, and when you look side by side at the best practices and the recommendations that the advisory body adopted this morning, you're going to see a lot of overlap, but also a lot of further elaboration, because the advisory body had the involvement of many, many stakeholders. And in the past, a couple of people had sniped, well, the best practices, that's what industry wants. What does government think about that? Well, we have recommendations now that really reflect consensus views of industry and government participants about a way forward. And they're very much aligned, which is very exciting for us. And it helps us get the message out. In our work with the ITU in this process, many more people have become aware of what the ICPC does, what expertise it can bring, and what data it has to help inform these activities. So just briefly, I'm going to share a few more statistics, if you'll bear with me, because we have a lot of data, and I need to give a shout out to my ICPC colleague, Andy Palmer-Felgate, who manages much of this data gathering and analysis for the ICPC. But as I mentioned before, the fault rate per route kilometer is going down. So we are doing a better job of protecting cables, but where there is cable damage, it is taking twice as long as compared with 2012 to repair a cable globally on average. And it really is a regulatory issue. There are also other factors. I don't want to discount the availability and usage rates for cable ships, particularly in certain regions. There are a lot of complexities with maintenance, but permitting issues are whether it is basic vessel permits, it is cabotage flag-related restrictions, it's crew restrictions, it's customs issues, trying to get both material and crew in and out of particular, you have to put into port somewhere to pick up and drop off people and repair materials. And so that really is driving a lot of the increases in repair times. Here we have some other detail about some of the elements for the delays. But there's massive variation globally in terms of repair times. We have some countries, as I mentioned, that have a lot of cable breaks that nevertheless have short permitting timeframes. The United Kingdom is a good example of that, very busy, crowded ocean areas, but short repair timeframes. A number of these countries with short average permitting timeframes for repair are in Europe, but not exclusively. South Africa actually has the best rate for the second year in a row. And so these kinds of things were very much a focus for Working Group 1 of the advisory body in looking at how can we improve the environment for repairs, because a loss of connectivity, given our digital dependence, can be catastrophic these days. And so again, we are already talking within the ICPC about how we might do a better job of disseminating some of this data so that stakeholders can make better use of it. But we have a lot of other resources that we also want others working with oceans and telecommunications issues to be aware of. Our recommendations, again, are more industry-facing. We just released a new report addressing submarine cables and marine biodiversity. We did a lot of work. This is a successor to a 2009 report with UNEP WCMC, so another one of our UN agency partnerships, but it's very much science-focused and meant to inform implementation of the BBNJ agreement. And so we referenced this a lot in a recent consultation actually with the UK government about how it's going to implement its treaty obligations there. And so this is a lot of the kind of activity that we do, whether it's science or operations or law, and we would like to continue to work with you all on this. So I've run far over time today, but appreciate your time. Thank you.